January 15th, 1919. A cold, ordinary winter afternoon in Boston. Then, a deep, metallic groan echoed through the neighborhood, followed by a deafening explosion. A massive 25-foot-high wall of thick, dark brown liquid raced outward, violently crashing down into the tight cobblestone streets. Within seconds, the sticky surge crushed homes, flipped heavy horse-drawn wagons, and instantly trapped anyone caught in its path. When the syrup finally settled, an ordinary industrial accident had escalated into the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. Over a century later, this event often gets brushed aside as a strange piece of trivia. Look closely at the evidence, however, and you will find a catastrophic, human-driven engineering failure. To understand how this happened, look at Boston's North End in the early 20th century. It was a densely populated, bustling neighborhood where factories sat right alongside clustered brick homes filled with immigrant families. Looming directly over those homes was an enormous 50-foot steel tank holding more than 2 million gallons of molasses. Today, we think of molasses as a baking ingredient, but at the time, it was a vital military resource. The thick syrup was fermented to manufacture industrial alcohol, a primary ingredient used to produce explosives and ammunition on an industrial scale. Despite its lethal purpose on the battlefield, families living next door simply accepted the towering metal cylinder as a mundane part of the local skyline. Dropping a massive, volatile industrial asset directly into a crowded residential zone created a terrible blind spot. The people passing by every day had no idea they were living in the shadow of a ticking time bomb. The company behind the tank, United States Industrial Alcohol, was chasing massive wartime profits. To get the facility operational quickly, they rushed the construction process and entirely bypassed standard safety margins. This diagram illustrates the first major compromise. Instead of using the thick, standard safety-grade steel required for a structure of this size, engineers authorized the use of plates that were dangerously thin. To assemble those sheets, the workers used mismatched rivets. They didn't fit properly, leaving tiny structural gaps everywhere the metal plates connected. The structure immediately began showing signs of severe stress. On cold nights, neighbors reported hearing loud, metallic groans and deep pops echoing from the steel as it struggled to hold the immense weight inside. Molasses even began dripping through the seams. Instead of halting production for a structural inspection, the company ordered the tank painted brown so the dark syrup stains would blend in. By deliberately masking those warning signs to protect their production schedule, the corporation turned a flawed storage container into a deadly threat. Ignoring the constant groaning and leaking metal, the company kept receiving fresh shipments, filling the weakened cylinder to the absolute brim. Then came the fatal environmental trigger. In mid-January, Boston experienced a sudden, unseasonal spike in winter temperatures. Looking at this cross-section, you can see the basic physics of thermal fluid expansion at work. The sudden warmth caused the massive volume of syrup inside to thin out and rapidly expand, drastically increasing the internal pressure against the outer walls. As that pressure spiked, it pushed the struggling steel plates and those mismatched rivets far beyond their maximum load limit. The combination of cheap, compromised building materials and basic environmental physics guaranteed that the walls were going to fail. On that January afternoon, the metal finally ripped open, unleashing millions of gallons of thick, dark syrup that swept away everything in its path. When the wave receded, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. Entire buildings were flattened into splintered wood, leaving a vast field of debris around the epicenter. The cleanup required a grueling, heavy industrial effort. Workers used cutting torches to dismantle the massive, twisted sheets of steel blown across the streets. Today, the story of a city flooded by sticky syrup is often told as a quirky historical novelty, but treating it as a joke obscures the truth. This event serves as a stark, textbook case study in the human cost of abandoning basic engineering ethics. The Great Molasses Flood proves a simple, brutal reality. When infrastructure is built on corporate greed and willful ignorance, disaster is never an accident. It is entirely inevitable. Without warning, a massive steel storage tank ruptured, sending a roaring 50-foot wave of thick molasses racing through the crowded streets of Boston's North End. Within seconds, the dense liquid tore buildings from their foundations. Wagons were overturned, and pedestrians were instantly buried in the rushing debris. If a tank of water burst, some victims might have been able to swim to safety, but the sheer weight and viscosity of heavy molasses made escape physically impossible. Every step a person took and every struggle to break free actively pulled them deeper into the sticky wreckage. This bizarre environment created a lethal trap that claimed 21 lives in less than a minute. Police officers, firefighters, local sailors, and surviving neighbors rushed into this claustrophobic tangle of twisted steel and splintered wood, desperately searching for survivors. But the rescue teams immediately encountered a grueling biological reality. The harder they pulled on a trapped victim, the more the clinging, dense syrup dragged them back down into the ruins. Then, the cold winter air settled over the disaster zone, triggering a rapid and unexpected physical shift in the environment. As temperatures dropped, the sprawling pool of molasses cooled and hardened into a rigid, cement-like shell. Victims were locked firmly in place, forcing exhausted crews to hack through the hardened crust just to free them. A structural collapse that took seconds to destroy the neighborhood triggered an agonizing recovery effort. Because the physical state of the syrup kept shifting, clearing the victims took days of grueling, desperate labor. When the immediate disaster ended, over 150 people were left with severe injuries. Entire families mourned the dead, while standing in front of empty lots where their homes had been destroyed beyond repair. Getting the city functioning again required a massive logistical undertaking. Thousands of workers spent weeks meticulously washing the sticky residue off rail tracks, brick buildings, and the freezing waters of the harbor. Even after the streets were clear, the disaster left a visceral imprint on the city. For months, residents reported that the heavy, sweet smell of molasses still permeated the North End. With the physical cleanup complete, the investigation began. A massive industrial steel tank does not simply vanish. Experts needed to trace the wreckage back to the exact cause of the failure. Investigators began analyzing the jagged, twisted remnants of the steel plates, working backward from the debris field to identify the initial point of structural collapse. This blueprint details the mechanical design required to hold millions of gallons, but investigators discovered the tank was never properly designed for this purpose, bypassing safety tests. The engineering failed to account for hydrostatic pressure, the immense outward force exerted against these joints. Documents revealed that the tank was pushed into service without adequate testing, despite glaring warning signs of structural weakness. By prioritizing a fast-moving production timeline over basic safety checks, the company chose to operate a ticking time bomb in the middle of a residential neighborhood. The disaster was the direct, lethal result of corporate negligence and the decision to sacrifice engineering standards for higher profit margins. Armed with forensic evidence, victims and their families sparked a massive legal battle, moving the fight from the sticky streets to the rigid halls of the court system. Taking on a powerful industrial corporation required a staggering amount of documentation. Lawyers amassed an overwhelming volume of structural reports, expert testimonies, and victim accounts, dragging the litigation out for years. In the end, the victims won. The courts found the company entirely responsible for the disaster and ordered them to pay extensive financial compensation to the survivors. This ruling set a historic precedent. Major corporations could no longer hide behind claims of unavoidable accidents to dodge accountability for their negligent engineering practices. The shockwaves of the Boston verdict rippled outward, panicking the national construction industry and prompting an immediate demand for strict regulatory oversight. Across the United States, local governments rapidly mandated new building regulations. Mandatory material stress testing and required certifications for structural engineers became the standard law. Modern engineering safety standards were built on the lessons of this tragedy, ensuring that every bridge and skyscraper today stands according to codes paid for the lives of those 21 victims. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to explore more forgotten disasters, historical mysteries, and incredible true stories, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.